Let's have the conversation most people are far too distracted to even begin. And I mean that in the most literal sense. Most people will scroll right past this. They will glance at the title, feel a brief flicker of recognition somewhere in their chest, and then swipe away because something inside them already senses that this conversation will be uncomfortable. And in the world we live in now, discomfort is something we have been conditioned to avoid almost automatically. But you are still here, and that matters. We tend to imagine a wasted life as something dramatic, a spectacular failure, a public collapse, a cinematic unraveling. We picture rock bottom, losing everything, or some obvious and undeniable breakdown. But that is almost never how it really happens. For most people, life is not lost in one violent moment. It is lost gradually, quietly, and in forms so comfortable that they hardly look dangerous at all. It is the Tuesday afternoon spent scrolling until your eyes blur, not because you were fulfilled, but because you were numb. It is the passion project sitting in an old folder for 3 years, untouched, silently accusing you every time you click past it. It is looking into the mirror and seeing a person who still looks like you, still sounds like you, yet no longer quite feels like you. And somewhere along the way, with no dramatic event you can point to, you became a side character in a life that was always meant to be your own. That is the quiet tragedy of this era. We are living in an age of functional stagnation. You may have a stable job, you may pay your bills on time, you may check every conventional box that adulthood is supposed to require, and still, internally, you feel like a passenger in a car you should be driving. Technically, you are moving, the calendar keeps turning, the years keep advancing, but you are not actually going anywhere that means something to you. And in those quiet moments before sleep, you feel it. That hollow, restless sensation that something essential is being left unlived. This is not about hustle culture. It is not about squeezing more productivity out of your day. It goes deeper than that. It is about the central psychological question of human existence. Why do we settle for what is merely fine when we are capable of something far greater? Why is it easier to remain in a familiar but constricting cage than to walk through a door that has been open for years? Martin Heidegger explored this through the idea of das Man, or the they. His point was that most of us do not truly live our own lives. We live the life they expect from us. We speak in borrowed language. We chase their version of success. We measure ourselves against their standards. We quietly inherit their fears. And after enough time, we become so fluent in the expectations of others that we no longer remember the sound of our own voice. Escaping that is not a single breakthrough. It is not a dramatic revelation. It is daily confrontation with reality. It is slowly realizing that your comfort zone is not a sanctuary. It is a velvet-lined coffin. It feels soft, it looks harmless, but nothing inside it grows. So this is not surface-level motivation. We are going beneath slogans. We are going to confront 5 precise, uncomfortable truths that operate like hidden emergency brakes on your life. These are not tips. They are not catchy lines to screenshot and forget. They are fundamental shifts in how you understand your own existence. If you can actually sit with them, if you can resist the temptation to simply agree and move on, then you can begin reclaiming the years you have been silently giving away to things that never deserved them. If you are exhausted by the autopilot version of yourself, the one that keeps saying maybe tomorrow to every meaningful dream, stay through every part of this. Your brain is biologically designed to avoid the exact information that would interrupt its routine. That is not weakness, that is wiring. The brain prefers safety and efficiency, but today we work through that together. If you are done living on autopilot, write this somewhere. even just to yourself, I choose to wake up. Number 1. The sunk cost of a false identity. One of the deepest, most painful reasons people lose years, sometimes entire decades, is a psychological trap known as the sunk cost fallacy. In economics, a sunk cost is money already spent that cannot be recovered regardless of what you do next. Intelligent investors are taught not to base future decisions on sunk costs because the money is already gone. What matters is what serves you now. But in life, almost nobody thinks this way. In life, a sunk cost becomes the time, energy, identity, and emotional investment you have poured into a version of yourself that no longer fits. We stay in degrees we hate because we are already almost finished. We stay in relationships that have emotionally ended years ago because of how much history we share. We keep climbing career ladders that lead nowhere meaningful because we have already spent so much time on them. We tell ourselves that leaving would make all those years meaningless. But here is the painful truth. That time is already gone. It's gone whether you stay or whether you leave. Remaining in a miserable situation for another 5 years does not recover the years already spent. It only doubles the total cost of the mistake. You are not respecting your past by remaining trapped. You are sacrificing your future to protect an ego that cannot bear to admit it chose badly. Think about how ordinary this is. Someone spends 4 years studying law, hates every minute of it, but keeps going because stopping now would mean those years meant nothing. Someone stays in a dead relationship because of the apartment, the mutual friends, and the emotional investment already made. These are not rare cases, they are everywhere. People quietly taxing their own futures because they cannot bring themselves to cut losses in the present. We often mistake consistency for growth, but they are not the same thing. Consistency in the right direction builds a life. Consistency in the wrong direction is just a sustained mistake that looks disciplined. Many people are fiercely loyal to identities they outgrew years ago. Maybe you are still trying to fulfill a dream you had at 18 without noticing that your values at 28 or 38 are no longer the same. You are trying to force yourself into a life that no longer fits and wondering why it feels hard to breathe. This connects to narrative identity theory. Human beings are not just creatures who live, we are creatures who narrate. From childhood onward, we tell ourselves a story about who we are, and then we spend years defending that story, even when it's hurting us. If your inner narrative says, "I am someone who never quits," then you may reject every sign telling you that quitting is not failure, but wisdom. If your story says, "I am loyal," then you may stay committed to things long after they have stopped deserving your loyalty. In this way, you become trapped inside your own self-concept, defending a version of yourself that was written years ago and never revised. To live purposefully, you must be willing to betray your former self. You must be willing to let people say that you have changed. Of course you have changed. You are meant to. What does not evolve is often already dead. Change is not disloyalty to who you once were. It is honesty towards who you are becoming. Here is a practical question. Look at your biggest commitments, your job, your relationship, your main habits. Ask yourself honestly, if I had no prior history with this, no time invested, and I were choosing from scratch today, would I choose this now? Would you apply for this job? Would you enter this relationship? Would you adopt these habits? If the answer is genuinely no, then you are not still investing. You are paying a daily fear tax. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Most people are still living as what happened to them. The degree they once chose while confused, the city they stayed in because leaving felt difficult, the identity inherited from family, circumstance, or fear. Real purpose begins when you understand that identity is not a fixed monument. It is a draft. It can be revised. It can be rewritten. And the pen is still in your hand. The Stoics saw this clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He was not only talking about difficult people or random misfortunes, he was talking about the internal script you keep repeating long after it has become false. Stoicism asks you to separate who you are from what has happened to you. Epictetus, born a slave, refused to let imposed limitation define his character. He said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." If he could refuse the identity that circumstance forced on him, then you do not need to remain imprisoned by the identity fear forced on you either. If you are ready to release who you used to be, say it clearly, "I am allowed to change." Number 2, the illusion of productive distraction. If we are honest, busyness is one of the most convincing disguises a wasted life can wear. In modern culture, being busy has become a kind of status marker. A packed schedule is treated as proof of importance. Constant activity is mistaken for progress. We answer messages at midnight to prove dedication. We skip meals to prove commitment. We talk about exhaustion almost as if it were a medal. But there is a huge difference between movement and progress. You can run on a treadmill for hours, burn energy, sweat, and feel exhausted, and still remain exactly where you began. That is what active procrastination looks like in real life. Real effort, real fatigue, no meaningful forward motion. We fill our days with low-stakes maintenance work. We answer emails instantly as if our response speed determines our value. We adjust formatting on things that do not matter. We sit through meetings that should have been one message. We research our goals so endlessly that research itself becomes a substitute for action. We call it preparation. But preparation without eventual execution is just procrastination in a more respectable costume. Why does this happen? Because the real work is frightening. The deep work, the identity-level work. Writing the first page means facing the possibility that you may not be as talented as you hope. Making the call that could launch your next chapter means risking rejection. Having the hard conversation means risking loss. These fears are real, and the brain, which is built for safety rather than meaning, will choose the safer, low-risk task every time unless you consciously intervene. Staying in endless preparation is a defense mechanism. If you are always getting ready, you never have to truly fail. You can remain in a suspended state of potential, insulated from the pain of trying and falling short. Psychologists sometimes call this productivity theater, performing progress while avoiding the work that would actually move your life. The Pareto principle tells us that most meaningful results come from a small percentage of actions. Usually, 80% of outcomes come from 20% of efforts. But for most people, that crucial 20% gets crowded out by urgent but unimportant maintenance. We become highly efficient at things that barely matter while neglecting the work that would actually alter our lives. There is also the law of forced deficiency. There is never enough time to do everything, but there is always enough time to do what matters most. When you say, "I don't have time," what you usually mean is, "This is not my priority." Everyone has the same 24 hours. The difference between an extraordinary life and an average one is not time, it is focus, it is ruthless prioritization. So try this. Look back at the last 48 hours. How much of your time went into maintaining what already exists, emails, habits, obligations, routines, and how much of it went into building something genuinely new? If almost all of it went to maintenance, then you are not creating a life, you are just managing one. and a managed life is not the same as a lived one. Purpose does not come from clearing your inbox. It does not come from being the quickest responder. It comes from becoming the architect of your future instead of the manager of your present circumstances. Stop asking whether you are getting things done. Start asking whether you are doing the right things. Annie Dillard said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. Not our distant future, not our vague hopes, our days. If your days are filled with digital noise, low-level errands, and trivial maintenance, then your life will become a blur of unlived potential. It is time to cut through the noise until you can hear the signal again." The Stoics would have understood this immediately. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He was not lamenting the shortness of life, he was naming the carelessness with which we spend it. Marcus Aurelius sharpened that same point into practice. Confine yourself to the present and to the most important action available within it. Purposeful people do not live in hypothetical someday. They live in the single task that matters now. If you are done using busyness as camouflage, say it. I choose impact, not noise. Number 3, the paralysis of the perfect season. Most people are quietly waiting for permission from the universe. They believe a season is coming when everything will finally align. The finances will stabilize, the relationship will settle, the children will be older, the job will be less demanding, the timing will finally feel right. Then they will begin living as they really want to live. This feels wise, it feels mature, it feels responsible. But when exactly has your life ever entered a season where everything was fully calm, fully aligned, and fully ready? When have the demands stopped long enough for the stars to arrange themselves into a perfect beginning? That season does not exist. It never has. Life is composed of neat periods of peace with occasional disruptions. Life is ongoing transition. One complication overlaps another. One season bleeds into the next. If you keep waiting for the right time, you will keep waiting all the way to the end, and you will look back with the unbearable clarity that comes when there is no time left to begin. We use the future as storage for our current lack of courage. We imagine that some future version of ourselves will be more disciplined, more brave, more ready, more rested. But your future self is just you with less time left and more deeply practiced habits of delay. Every day you choose waiting over beginning, you are not becoming more prepared, you are becoming better at postponing. Temporal discounting explains this well. The brain discounts future rewards in favor of immediate comfort. Faced with a hard but meaningful action versus an easy and safe moment of comfort, the brain usually picks comfort. That's not evil, it's biology. But biology can be interrupted by awareness. Then there is the Zeigarnik effect, the tension created by incomplete and unstarted tasks. When you tell yourself, next year, the idea doesn't disappear. Your mind keeps it open in the background, adding quiet mental strain every time you postpone. Waiting does not bring peace, it creates invisible weight. The perfect season is a mirage. It remains distant no matter how long you move towards it. The only moment where you can act is this one, the inconvenient, imperfect, badly timed, ordinary now. That is what the Stoics knew. Conditions will always be incomplete. Resources will always feel insufficient. Confidence will never fully precede action. They did not wait for life to become ideal before acting internally. They worked within existing conditions. If you can't pursue what matters in the middle of the noise, you won't know what to do with silence even if it somehow arrives. So begin while the conditions are imperfect. Write while the room is noisy. Make the call while your voice still shakes. Start before it feels graceful. The imperfect beginning done now is worth infinitely more than the perfect beginning that remains imaginary. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not indulge in dreams of what you do not have, but count the blessings you actually possess." He was not telling you to abandon ambition. He was telling you to stop using better conditions as an excuse to avoid real conditions. Seneca added another edge to this truth. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But opportunity does not wait politely until you feel ready. It arrives when